So, good afternoon, everyone, and most welcome to Kvinna's launch of the report called Women's Rights in Western Balkans, Women in Politics, Gender-Based Violence and Security for Women Human Rights Defenders in Albania, Bosnia-Herzegovina, Kosovo, Montenegro, North Macedonia, and Serbia. And I'm very happy that we will spend this afternoon together with four prominent women human rights defenders and activists from 4 different countries in the region, and also a colleague of mine. So most welcome to everyone in the panel. And the research has been funded by Sweden and the Swedish International Development Cooperation Agency. And before we start, I would like to mention also that unfortunately we were going to be joined by a 5th women human rights defender and activist, Larisa Kovacevic from Bolja Budućnost in Tuzla, Bosnia-Herzegovina. But unfortunately, there is no electricity right now in Tuzla, so she's not able to join us, which is very unfortunate, and not least because she also represents a Roma women's rights organization. But we hope that we will still have the perspective of Roma women in this talk and conversation this afternoon. But yeah, this just illustrates one of the struggles that women's activists face in the region. So with that, I would like to welcome my colleague, Sofia Wróbaszki, who is also the main editor of the report, and who has been working very closely with this to introduce a bit more about the actual report. So please, Sofia, the virtual floor is yours.
Thank you, Stina, and thank you all for being here today. It's really an honor to be amongst the panel of such great women human rights defenders. To begin with, my name is Sofia Wróbaszki. I am the project coordinator in the Belgrade office of the Kvinna Foundation, and I work, as Stina said, very closely on this report. And I've actually worked on this report since its inception 5 years ago. So the very first report where we created the methodology and all of that. I'd like to begin first by thanking our researchers who wrote this year's chapters, Leila Gachanica and Raba Joshi. Thank you for your hard work. And before going into the research findings, I think it's important to take just a moment to talk about the methodology of the report and how it's come together. So we collect data through a desk study, data collection method, but we also send data requests. And those we only send to the institutions that are responsible for implementing the Istanbul Convention in each of the 6 Western Balkan countries. To fill the major gaps in data that we face across the Western Balkans, we rely heavily on partner organizations to the Kvinna Foundation. So partner organizations provide us with a plethora of information and data, and they also serve as peer reviewers at the very end. So they look over the report and make sure that everything is up to date, because without this field work and on-the-ground experience, this report really couldn't be as full and full of information as we hope. So again, thank you as well to partner organizations. For the indicators of the report, from the first report 5 years ago until now, we keep the same 3 main indicators, and then the sub-indicators change from time to time, just depending on the year. The reason we keep the same 3 indicators is because this actually serves as a gender benchmarking report. So we want to be able to compare over time some of the results and research findings in the countries and at a regional level as well. So women in politics, gender-based violence, and attacks on women human rights defenders. These are the 3 main fields that we look at. When it comes to women in politics, and I'll do my best to do a very brief overview of some of the research findings from this year and to tie in some trends over the past 5 years. When it comes to women in politics specifically, I think there's really quite enough information on women parliamentarians and the numbers of women in parliamentary structures, not only in the Western Balkans, but everywhere. I think it's really more important to look a little bit deeper and to look at a different representation and a different level of government. And for me, it's important to focus on local level government, so municipal. And when it comes to women's representation at these levels, either mayoral or city council level, the representation is extremely low in the Western Balkans. So this year, the average of women mayors in the Western Balkans was only 7%. And Kosovo, notably, for some years now, has not had a single woman mayor. So this is of great concern. And when it comes to city council, I mean, for example, Bosnia and Herzegovina has only 18% of women representation at the city council level. So again, these numbers are not so encouraging, but they are very different than when we're looking at parliamentary structures and women's representation there. And furthermore, just to dig in a little bit deeper, women from ethnic minority groups, as well as LGBTQI+ communities, they face serious challenges in not only entering politics, but being represented at all, at any level of government. So we're not seeing this deficit in representation being addressed or prioritized by any of the Western Balkan governments. And again, cause for concern there. When it comes to gender-based violence, I think, I mean, there are no official statistics on, for example, femicide in the region. And there are a lot of women CSOs that are collecting data and information every year. But it's hard to determine the exact number of women who have died as a direct result of gender-based violence or domestic violence. What we do know is that the trends and the high rates of femicide are not decreasing over the years. So unfortunately, we're not seeing a trend in decreases in this matter. And just as one example, 2 years ago, the report Women's Rights in Western Balkans reported on 30 women in Serbia alone that were killed as a result of femicide. And we'll see at the end of this year what that number is. But again, these are really high numbers and really shocking statistics. And when it comes to the Istanbul Convention itself, none of the Western Balkan countries have met the minimum standards for women's shelters. And when we look at some of the data that we reported in the first report, and when we compare it to the number of beds in women's shelters in this most recent report, it actually turns out that women's shelters are losing funding throughout the region. And almost, I don't want to say all countries, but a lot of the countries and the majority of them in the Western Balkans have actually fewer beds this year than they did in 2016. So it's just these recurring negative trends and these areas that we're not seeing improvement in the past 5 years. And 5 years to me and to any researcher is enough time to see some changes and trends. 1 year is not enough, but 5 years is really quite a significant amount of time. And just before moving on to the last indicator, I want to say that the achievements that we do record in each of the reports when it comes to gender-based violence, when it comes to implementing the Istanbul Convention or working on mitigating gender-based violence, all of these achievements are really the direct result of women's civil society organizations in the Western Balkans. And it's even so much that the achievements made by national governments who should be implementing the Istanbul Convention, even those achievements, they don't come from the sky. They don't come out of thin air. They are results of years of advocacy from women's civil society organizations. They're the result of years of work on the ground and in the field in this respect. So that's a really important aspect when we're reporting data, to talk about the background of that data as well. And finally, just to move on to the last indicator, attacks on women human rights defenders. There were no years in any of these reports that had no attacks in any of the countries. So each year there were reported attacks on women human rights defenders, but some years more than others. And unfortunately, there's never a decrease in the trend. It's always going up. And for some countries, again, Serbia in particular, it's growing exponentially. It's such a high and fast rate of attacks, and the numbers are getting higher. And when we look at the 2019 report, we weren't actually able to fit all of the attacks for Serbia in that report. So we had to allocate space in this report to do a follow-up of the attacks that we couldn't fit and where they are now, whether they're in court, whether they've been reported, what's happening with them. So just in the region, when it comes to the nature of the attacks on women activists, what we're seeing is they're becoming more frequent, yes, but they're also becoming more public and with fewer consequences, sometimes with no consequences at all. And when we look at threats, online and offline, they're becoming more explicit. They're becoming more brutal, intentionally more violent. I mean, some of them, the things that we've heard and that activists have reported to us directly have been so violent and so inappropriate. I mean, they're not even sentences I would repeat on a panel like this. I really, again, and with no consequences. And sometimes it is politicians, it is decision makers, it is celebrities, it is people with a lot of power and with a lot of viewership, let's say, and who have a lot of access to a lot of different forms of power. When they are orchestrating these attacks, when they are behind these attacks, it is almost always without any repercussions. So again, it seems like a lot of this is very disheartening, and it feels like that sometimes as well. And there's so much more to the report. I mean, it's 100 pages long, but what I do want to share today, and I'm really excited actually to see the discussion and to talk about these things more, especially from on the ground experience. But what I want to share is that there are so many women's organizations that are working on these things, that are seeing the gaps and that have known about these gaps for years, that have known about the trends even without a report. So they are working towards things that even should be done by national governments. They're implementing programs, they're pushing for things, they're dedicating all of their resources and time to advocacy. And that's the part at the very end of the report where we talk about those things. That's the part that really gives the hope, you know, more so than looking at some of the numbers and the data. And I think I'll leave it at that for now. And I'm really looking forward to this discussion.
Thank you so much, Sofia, for that overview with a few very important facts and figures on these different areas. And so I'm also very happy that we have this space to dive deeper into the different areas. So we will start with women in politics to look a bit into what the situation is in the different countries. So we will go first to Kosovo, actually, and I want to welcome Adelina Berisha to give us some examples from Kosovo, and specifically looking at, I think the legal frameworks is very interesting to see what are there in terms of obstacles and possibly positive factors. So please, Adelina, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Stina. I would like to thank Sofia for informing us and briefing us about how the situation is in the region, and this very important report which informs us about the situation and all these important aspects of life of women in the region. And it's also sad to see that we are not standing very good when we see all these data and all this information. From what Sofia shared, the Kosovo doesn't exclude from those findings. The situation is quite similar throughout the region, besides some specifics. When it comes to women in politics in Kosovo, we still struggle with, first of all, the patriarchal mindset that kind of inhibits our women to join and feel fulfilled and feel to give all their input and all their knowledge when they are part of politics, because usually political parties, not usually, but all political parties in Kosovo are run by men, and men think of themselves first. There are different obstacles that women face initially when they join a political party, starting from lack of finances, to create campaigns, to promote themselves, to promote their platforms, what they want to push forward. It's quite difficult for women to have this support from leaders of political parties initially. Then it comes the role of media. Also, media doesn't give too much attention to women who are present in politics or who want to become future leaders. Focus of media is again on these powerful men who provide them with money or bribe them in different ways, or they are themselves owners of a lot of media. Even the Council of Europe report now mentions how our media is influenced by main political party leaders and how they are switching the all societal mindset into in what they want to us to focus on, and they leave important issues out of the public sphere by controlling media. Then it's also important to mention in Kosovo that although there's been a lot of advocacy and initiatives from women's civil society organizations to align the law or election law on local and national level with the law on gender equality, it's become quite difficult for us to reach our aim, because the law on gender equality requires 50-50 representation of women in all spheres of life, while the law on elections still requires only 30% of women representation in party lists and higher positions. So for now, yes, the parliament is comprised with this, thankfully to the quota. We had a lot of women that were elected directly from voters' votes, not because of quota. So this is a good, it's a positive step in our society, that we see that more women are getting elected through votes, not because of quota. But still, we see again a lot of political parties trying to shush and to silence the women who are more vocal, and trying to put them on the back of the list, hoping that they will not get votes. We had this case with LDK, with Vjosa Osmani, who is one of the most voted women in Kosovo, and even with men, she got more votes than a lot of men who were similarly candidating for position. But her political party tried to put her on the back of the list, and now after we had a lot of, also I forgot to mention this, that in Kosovo we had a lot of elections happening in the past years. And this is indicating also the governments and the women in politics, because the previous government had at least tried to have 30% women representation in ministries as ministers, but the parliament voted Albin Kurti's government against it, and they broke the government, and now the new government has fewer spaces for women, fewer women in leadership. And so although we have as civil society, we do a lot of meetings with women to encourage them to run for positions. We also work a lot with citizens, mainly also women, to vote for women, to support women. So it's very important to have solidarity and sisterhood in this aspect, to support each other, and to know that when it comes to women's rights, when it comes to improving our life, we saw that, for example, the Istanbul Convention, all the changes for support for shelters usually comes from women caucus groups, women leaders, and civil society working closely with them. So it's very important that us as women support each other and vote each other, because now it's a lot of things now come up, because we can also start and discuss about does quota guarantee equality? Are these women really representing the needs of women? But when you see 70% of men who are there and do not represent at all women, at least we have some women, maybe not all of them, but at least some of them will have the social awareness and work more on improving gender equality, and they can also influence other women to switch their agendas and join us in improving the lives of men and women in Kosovo. I will not go further. We can continue this discussion, I guess, while we continue our discussion. Thank you, Stina.
Thank you so much, Adelina, for all those many important points and your experiences from Kosovo. And I'm sure what you mentioned about the political parties is true for many of the countries. And I also think it's interesting what you mentioned, like on the one hand, to have a certain number of women, on the other hand, to have a more feministic policy and politics. So this is going to be very, very interesting to discuss further. And also thank you for mentioning some of the initiatives by civil society to do something about this problem. And let's come back to that for sure. And now let's move to our studio in Belgrade, and Đurđa Trajković from Serbia, most welcome. We look forward to hearing some of your experiences and reflections from Serbia, please. Floor is yours.
Thank you so much, and thank you for having me here. I think that the situation in the Western Balkans is similar in a lot of countries. And I think that when it comes to women in politics, what I would say is that representation is important, but it's not representative in this case. What we are getting from the ground as reports is that on one hand, representation is important, but on the other hand, in this situation, specifically in Serbia, it serves as a mechanism of control. What I mean by that is that the women who are in politics have not won those seats, have not won those rights, but they were actually handed out positions in order to fulfill the quota. So on one hand, while it is important, on the other hand, the danger or the challenge is that once you lose that position, you don't know how to fight for it. But this is a long-term, I think, issue. On the other hand, it does become a mechanism of maintaining the status quo because the real access to power and decision-making is not there, save few examples. So on one hand, what we are experiencing is that there isn't a push on a collective level to become this a part of a discussion, but it is thanks to the individual efforts or women's organizations that we even know about these issues and the debates that are probably kind of conducted at the fringes or the margins of the society. And this is important, I think, because on one hand, women's rights organizations have done incredible work and are still doing the incredible work. However, enthusiasm and passion are part of emancipatory politics, but they're not enough. So what I mean by this is that a lot of times it feels that there are a lot of promises, but not traces and written papers about it. So it kind of comes down to having one word against the other. And this is what a lot of women's organizations are reporting, that it is the challenge, because then the responsibility and liability is invisible. So having said that, I do want to say that one of the challenges that we are going to be facing, specifically in Serbia, is with two new ministries. On one hand, we have Ministry of Human Rights, but on the other hand, we have the Ministry of Family. So what in theory should be the progressive side, the human rights, is kind of undermined by the very conservative structural politics that we will see in upcoming months and upcoming years. And we have already seen attacks by the Ministry of Family against women and women's rights organizations. So we will see how the situation will play out. But I think that there remains a challenge of how to maintain or not relationship with the government and with all of these issues happening. And when it comes to issues of gender-based violence, I think that they're very well connected with women in politics, simply because we are seeing an increase in numbers, an increase in attacks. But I'm going to stop here simply because we're going to talk about it during the discussion and touch upon what are the challenges in those areas. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Julia. And you're right. I mean, these are very important connections to make. And thank you for sharing the information about these new ministries in Serbia. As you say, it's going to be very interesting to follow the development and see what happens. So now let's move to Albania, and I want to welcome Ines Leskaj. And we know that Albania is one of the countries where the government is currently 50-50, right? So it's going to be very interesting to hear your perspective on is this a sign of progressing gender equality? And also, of course, what's the situation at the local level for women in politics? So please, Ines, the floor is yours.
Yes, thank you, Stina. It is true that in Albania, the situation at the governmental level is that 47% of the members of parliament are women and girls, let's say, because there are some young women as well, fortunately. But that's not, let's say, the true face of the political situation and decision making in Albania, in the country. This is, to our opinion, as civil society representatives, and not only of our, but several organizations, a strategy of the government that is running now. They are, let's say, if I can say, using the women just for statistics and figures. And this is clearly demonstrated in the highly positions at the decision-making level, and as you mentioned as well, at the local level. In the municipality councils, it's true that with statistics and figures, again, women are represented at almost 35%, and they are doing fine, let's say, with the gender quota and legal codes in terms of legislation. In terms of real and proper inclusion, and in terms of women being, for example, covered and supported by the political parties, even financially or with capacity buildings, but even by including media, the media coverage where these women present in the politics, it's quite less than compared to the men that are part of the politics. So this is more or less a general, let's say, perception and explanation of the situation. I wanted as well to add the fact that we have this main issue of political system, or a main problem with our political system, because the political leaders are deciding the list. So in this case, there's no, let's say, it does not make sense discussing about gender quota and women's participation in politics, because even if some women are selected to be part of the list, both local and central government ones, the issue is that these are selected only for the fact to respect the code, the electoral code that is requiring 30% of women should be part of the political list. This might be, let's say, a positive step up to a certain level, but if we see from closely, from internally, as I said, and I will repeat it, the political system, this is something very wrong, and it's not in line with human rights and women's rights. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ines. Let's certainly stay a while with this dilemma with quotas, because on the one hand, it is really one of the single factors that you can pinpoint that has increased women's participation in the region. On the other hand, of course, it's not just unproblematic. So we are going to go to North Macedonia and welcome Irena Cvetkovic. And I know that you also have a lot of information and thoughts around quotas in North Macedonia. So please, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Stina, and thank you, Sofia, for sharing with us the data and the numbers. There is, in North Macedonia, like in each country, it has a higher political participation of women within the parliament compared to other fields due to quotas. And the dilemmas on quotas in political participation, or maybe to sum it up in a questions, in one question like, are numbers important, or who is entering politics is more important, is an old dilemma, still triggering different positions, even among feminists. And I think it's a very important question that we should ask ourselves from time to time. So let's take our case. In the previous regime in North Macedonia, was ruled by a right-wing Demo-Christian party, where some women actually had very important part. So yes, right-wing conservative politics are arena where many women find their space for political action. And I know that in many countries, including our, women in right-wing politics are just political decor. But we can witness that some women within dominant right-wing political surrounding manage to enter high political functions, and mostly thanks to the tutoring of their powerful male colleagues within party structure. But then the question for us is, isn't this a reality to women in left-wing politics also? And after Vomera lost power in 2016 and Gruevski, the prime minister, ran away in Hungary as a political asylum seeker, this political party has undergone some internal reforms. So now there is like all the new leadership within the party, and many of the previous most influential persons are now at the margins within the power structure of the party. But new women also entered this conservative political party. And for the first time this year, we had a chance to work with this political party and experience the gender differences when discussing issue concerning human rights, gender, and gender equality. So this is something that we learned very recently, let's say. Women, and I'm speaking about North Macedonia, women and men in right-wing political discourses use different narratives, speaking generally now. So for example, the homophobia is argued differently among men and women. For men politicians, gays can be disgusting, deviant, and dangerous. And in most of the cases, their emotional response towards them is hate and disgust. But for women, the homophobia takes different angle. They might feel sorry for them, advocate for medical help, or just use the word healing homosexuality instead of killing homosexuals. So the question for me is, although both positions are homophobic, there is no doubt about that, can we work more within the second position, and is it worth it? The recent adoption of the law on anti-discrimination included a very long-lasting and complicated process. I won't bother you with that. And in the final procedure this year, we had support from VMRO-DPMNE MPs, thanks to two women within this party who lobbied inside for ideological changes concerning this issue. So through this process, we learned that some women within right-wing politics have more left positions in the field of human rights, and their main terrain for right-wing politics are mostly questions concerning the nation in our context. That would be the position on the name of the country, position on the language, religion, national identity, etc. And again, I think that we should ask a question: can we use this position, and is it worth it? So I think that what we lack in North Macedonia is really to research what women are doing in right-wing policy. What do they get, politics? What do they get from it? And I think what is most important, to research and to try to understand what they can bring into this political realm. And thank you, Stina. I posted mostly questions, not answers, but I think it's important.
It is. Thank you so much, Rena. No, this is a very interesting questions and strategies to ask ourselves when we find, of course, allies. And of course, there are many women in many places and many levels who are working for gender equality in different ways. So I think this is very interesting as a concrete strategy. And with that, I would like to go back to Kosovo and ask into further how you are working and your network members possibly when it comes to increasing women's participation. You mentioned some of this already with campaigns for voting. I just want to give you a bit more space to elaborate on this. Please, Adelina.
Thank you, Stina. Yeah, being a network allows us to be present everywhere throughout Kosovo. So we are a network member-based NGO, and we have more than 158 members, women-run NGOs who are members of Kosovo Women's Network. And this allows us to be in touch with women in all Kosovo, throughout all Kosovo. By this, I mean that this also allows us to go there and to reach these women and to see where do they stand. Kosovo Women's Network now has also created the lobby on Kosovo Women's Lobby, which includes all women who are involved in politics, be it in a local or national level. We organize different meetings with these women. We go in different municipalities. We meet assembly members, women assemblies in municipalities. We speak with them. We try to see what are their struggles. We try to see what we as civil society can do to push forward any of their concerns. We also get information from women from the communities, different communities, and we try to align their needs with to present their needs to these women assemblies who can push forward different policies and do advocacy within. Not do advocacy, but vote for different issues that are important and relevant for women in municipal level. When it comes to national level, we again try to be always in touch with women in politics, with Women Caucus, with now we are lucky to have how should I say, president, she's not vice president, but Vjosa Osmani is now president in charge because our president, is in Hague now. And we have Vjosa as a president, we have Arbrina Govci as head of parliament. So these are very high positions with whom we try to work as much as possible closely to push forward different actions that are needed for us. It was Vjosa Osmani who proposed inclusion of Istanbul Convention on the Constitution, and this was because we had a lot of meetings with her while she was head of parliament, and informed her about the importance of having the Istanbul Convention part of our Constitution, and that's why they presented it at the parliament, and it was unanimously voted because it's been discussed. Women were all in this together, and they kind of pressured their male colleagues to also vote and inform them about the importance of the Istanbul Convention. So we try to use different aspects. Then again, Georgia mentioned violence against women in politics. We are very vocal when we see cases of violence against our women politicians, when we see sexist language used against them. We try when we see mansplaining a lot of men trying to teach us how to do our job and what is gender equality and how women should dress and how women should look like if they are in a political position. We had lots of such comments, and we try to address them. We try to stay together, stay strong, support each other, and express this solidarity among us. And these have been very positive steps that has kind of improved the situation. And even now the whole topic of women in politics is the discussion is a bit changed because we have strong women there. We had, for example, previous elections, we had Aida Durguti, who was vice president of the parliament, and she was also the strong with dignity women, and I know a lot of men praised her for being such a good politician, and now we have Vjosa, who again men are praising her. I know my father is 81 years old, but he voted for Vjosa because he says that she's a very vocal politician. So even when we see these kind of cases, even men change their attitudes and try to and vote for these women who are. So it is very important, all this connection between civil society and women in politics. It is very important to meet with each other, to discuss about problems that we face. Unfortunately, women in politics usually are women who are, even us, who are a bit more privileged, and we are not very informed about the different issues that women might face, women who we put in the margins might face, because I don't want to call them marginalized, but nobody's born marginalized. We put them in the margins and we make them marginalized. So it is very important to, when we talk about all these aspects about with these women, and they get informed about the real problems that women face, they try to do these changes through their position. So yeah, lobby has been very successful, Kosovo Women's Lobby, in addressing all these issues, and all these meetings, all the advocacy that we do in legislation. For example, the law on gender equality is basically all the comments were provided by us, civil society, in order to ensure that everything will be equally represented in the law. Also, the semantics are very important. So we provided input also on how the words were phrased within the law in order to ensure that gender equality and gender stereotypes will be excluded, and will be to be precautious about all these aspects. So it is very important, the role of civil society, again, in all these aspects, to inform women politicians about the issues, to be in touch with them, to support them when they are threatened, but also similarly to work on improving legislation in order to ensure that women participation will be granted by the legislation. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Adelina, and congratulations on your advocacy successes. And I think it's very interesting to hear about your strategies with really working on a lot of different levels and with a lot of different strategies. And I want to go back now to Serbia. I mean, Reconstruction Women's Fund that you're representing, Georgia, also is working together with a lot of different women's organizations and groups throughout the country. So I would love to invite you as well, if you have examples or information on what kind of work your organization and your partner organizations do to improve the situation for women in politics.
Thank you. Yes, we're supporting a lot of women organizations who are working mainly on gender-based violence. But one of the initiatives we are part of, it's called On the Right Track, and it's part of an initiative where we're trying to prepare for the everything that is already happening, but it's not officialized. In a sense, we're trying to prepare for the anti-gender that is coming our way, and we are kind of certain that this is going to happen here. And so we're trying to map different actors who are part of that movement and different strategies on how to combat them. So I think that there is a lot of effort and a lot of passion by women's organizations to push through that. On one hand, I think that what we are getting from our partner organization is craving for activism and craving for participation and having like really oriented and strategic actions. And I think that a lot of effort is going to kind of strategize and understand what will the future challenges be. Having said that, what we have supported is a lot of research on key political actors from whom attacks are coming, and trying to map how they're connected to the government or not, or the fringes of the government. And we are also trying to, at the same time, support activities and create responses to those attacks. So when I say that, one of our groups has had a challenge this year because it was attacked to be funded by Open Society Foundation and Soros and traders and foreign mercenaries. And this is the kind of the discourse we've been hearing in the 90s, but that came back, if it ever left, in the last 2 or 3 years. And it's strange because the partner organization works on arts and crafts. So basically what they're doing is they're kind of building a sustainable architecture from ecological materials found in that area. And they were attacked because they were supported by us and called foreign mercenaries. So what was interesting is the response. We kind of organized, gathered a lot of support from media-friendly journalists or women journalists who are more aware of the situation. And they threatened to disrupt the festival that this group kind of maintains each year. That hasn't happened, but I think that it brought us together. It brought kind of the strategy and organization together. And now one of the second phases to the response is to kind of create and build tulips in that village. It's a tulip festival. And what I'm trying to say is that women's organizations are responding in a non-violent, creative ways. And I think this is very important simply because we live in a very violent society. And I'm not talking only about physical violence, I'm talking about symbolic violence through the media, through all the kinds of spaces where this is happening today. So those are the initiatives or organizations that are working on kind of trying to build back a society that will be based on non-violence. The third initiative, I think that it's very important to say and underline, has to do specifically with the COVID-19 situation that we are bearing witness right now, and we're in the midst of that. It is fair to say that at least in Serbia, it was a civil society organizations and specifically women's organizations who have endured and actually provided a lot of support to women in danger, and basically took the role of government simply because the government shut down. And I think that even though this is, one could say, a great result, I don't think that, or none of us think that this should be the role of women's organizations. So on one hand, we have this challenge of constantly crossing the lines of responsibilities and authorities, whereas women's rights organizations do the work of the government, and then the government takes results and achievements. So I think this is one of the challenges for the future, or how to approach that and how to kind of discuss this. But I think that I've given a few examples, the directions in which partner organizations are going. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Georgia, for those excellent concrete examples of mobilization. And I think what you mentioned with the role of civil society as gap fillers, or even taking over the role of the state, is very important to raise. And as you say, this is really something that we've seen now during the COVID. And while women's organizations very often remain underfunded and under-recognized, we have a comment actually from one of the listeners, and it's about, I'm going to read it for you. It's about the quotas actually. And so there's one person who is amazed or surprised possibly to hear a lot of dismissive statements by women's rights activists on progress that has been achieved in advancing women's participation in decision-making in politics due to quota. So I just want to go back a bit to this discussion, since we had this comment, and I think it's really important also to be clear that I don't think that being dismissive is what's happening, but I would love to let you in, Irena, to elaborate a bit further on the views of your organization about this issue, please.
Oh, well, quite contrary. I was speaking not about only supporting women in politics, but supporting women in right-wing politics, which sometimes it can be a double-edged sword, for us working with human rights, especially with marginalized communities. So I wouldn't agree that we were dismissive, but I think that as feminists, we have a responsibility to really think and to really strategize when, on what occasions, and how we work with politicians. So within my organization, we do work, of course, a lot with politicians, but never in a way to support their political career. But we work on certain issues. So when we post a certain issue to the politicians, then we see with whom we can work. And it's very interesting. We never go strategically towards women that are in politics, but somehow, and it's, I think, very much expected, on issues that we are concerned about, mostly women within politics are interested. So what we do is we have a few years now created an LGBTI support interparliamentary party group, that gathers MPs coming from almost every parliamentarian political party, which is amazing. We have this inter-party group today. We are announcing to the media that it's formed because we have a recent government and recent parliament. So through this, and we have people, and we have MPs coming from the right-wing political party entering this group. And we use this group to work together jointly on setting reforms that are important for marginalized groups and women within our country and society. So it's like a both-way collaboration. They gain a lot of political capital by us in the parliament and within their party structures. And we gain a lot of political support within bodies that are important, like the assembly.
Mm-hmm. Thank you so much, Irena, for that further elaboration. And I think especially this interparliamentary group is very interesting and certainly something to look into for other countries as well. And so I want to finally let in Ines as well from Albania, in case you want to add something as well from your side, because I think this question with quotas might, and the fact that you have gender equality on some levels in terms of numbers might be also provoking to some. So please, Ines.
Yes, of course, this might have been a misunderstanding. Of course, that gender quota is a very positive achievement and element in the, and especially from the women's organizations that initiated this kind of, let's say, movement together with some of the women in politics. And of course that we appreciate very much the gender quota. Our only concern is that in relation to, as I mentioned earlier, to the selection of the girls and women that are active in politics. Of course, not all of them, but the way how the political system is functioning. So it's only, let's say, and this is for all the political parties in Albania. It's not only for the political party in rule, let's say. So this was just sharing a general concern as for the positive quotas and positive achievements are already mentioned there in the report, and we have already, let's say, reported about the high percentage of women in politics, government, etc. But even accompanying this with some concerns that are coming from, let's say, the ground, including here the decision-making structures as well. It's true that are not part of the women in politics, but are in line with this as element, as component. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ines, and not least for the important point that women's organizations very often have been leading on the advocacy efforts for gender equality quotas. So I'm thinking we should move on to gender-based violence now. And as you pointed out previously, Georgia, these topics are very much connected as well. But we know that, and there are research also showing that gender-based violence has been and is increasing during the pandemic, right? As I mean, in the Balkans, as in all the world. But I would like to start with you this time, Georgia, from Serbia. You mentioned that several of your partners are focusing on gender-based violence, and it would be very interesting to hear just about what is the current situation right now in Serbia regarding gender-based violence, please.
Thank you. So what happened during the COVID-19 crisis is that, and I think this is a global talk, that everything that was latent kind of became more visible. And I think that's what happened with gender-based violence as well. So on one hand, there was an increase in violence per se. understandably so, because of the lockdown, because of the quarantine, women were trapped to stay in homes where they were not supposed to be. So I think that the increase, and this is the estimate we'll see in January, February when the official reports come out, but the increase is 30%. So that's a huge number on one hand. On the other hand, what we've seen also is that because police could not go on the ground, because it was a shutdown because of the pandemic, it was really a challenge of how to get those women out, how to get them out of the violent situations. So it was a lot of logistics and a lot of organizing on how women's organizations were supposed to take that responsibility upon themselves. And then the third issue, I think, in all of this, I would kind of give an example of a bright case that gives us a lot of hope, and that's that I'm sure a lot of people have heard about it, but it is the case of Marija Lukic, who won the case court against one of the political officials or local sheriff in her environment. So he got sentenced to 3 months in prison because of the sexual harassment. We don't know if he's going to do the thing, but I think that there is a hope that this case will kind of be a precedent that could be referred for future. And I think at the same time, because there was a lot of solidarity, a lot of women went to the courts, a lot of women gave support, is that there is going to be an awareness and encouragement of other women to step up. However, on a different note, and I think this is the challenge for women's organizations and for all of us, is that we are still not being perceived in society as important actors. So even though on one hand you have all of these results, as Sofia was saying at the beginning, that thanks to women's organizations, you have numbers, you have examples, and you have kind of policies. On the other hand, within the public, we are not a reference point. So when women are in a situation of violence, they don't know where to go. So I think that for the future, there is something to be said about the strategies of visibility and how we want to be visible and how we want to be present in communities. Because I think that where you have a strong civil society, the first sector you go to is civil society, and then police, and then everybody else. And I think this should be our goal, or to think through, or how we're going to achieve this and how we're going to kind of spread in local communities even further. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much, Georgia. Very interesting. Yeah. I think it's very interesting what you say about this, how well known are women's organizations and how well known are their work, and we certainly have a responsibility there to those of us who have possibly a bit more influence to make sure that this is supported and happening. And with that, I would like to go to Albania and Ines, and because you're representing Albania Women's Empowerment Network, which is also a network of several organizations, and it would be very interesting to know a bit more on how your members and yourselves are also working with GBV at this point. I know, for example, that you have members who are working against trafficking of women and so on. So it would be very interesting to hear a bit more of how you about your work and how it's been influenced now during the COVID, please.
Yes, thank you, Stina. Yes, I'm representing 10 different women's organizations that are working mainly and basically on gender-based violence and providing as well services, direct services for girls and women, including here women that have been former victims of trafficking, like the psychosocial center Vatra that is in the south of Albania. During the pandemic, of course, that women's organizations have continued to support even by providing direct services and not stopping, let's say, their especially main social services like legal, psychological, and social services, including here including here a referral to some more long-term services for some of the organizations that are not able to provide such support. In collaboration with the Ministry of Health and Social Protection, we have as well. It's not that we prepared, but we just urged the ministry to notice during the difficult time that a protocol for entering in the shelters was missing, and the ministry, with support of some international organizations like the UN, they soon engaged an expert, and they prepared this important protocol for shelters in Albania. So this has been one good example of collaboration and of quick responders, let's say, to girls and women that were suffering exactly the gender-based violence and trafficking as well, because the protocol served to all the shelters that were providing services. I wanted to add that good practice is as well that the protection orders and immediate protection orders have continued, and that's why the civil society legal representatives have been able to support girls and women. So it was one of the rarest services that the courts, or the only duties and service that the courts in Albania, all over Albania, continue to provide. So this is once more a good example. I need to emphasize working more towards sexual violence issues, and especially towards working more with the communities, with girls and women, to report sexual violence, and not only girls and women. We have some statistics that were shared, I believe, by UN Women, but not only by them, because, as I said, we are working every day with girls and women that have been as well subject of sexual violence, that 1 in 4 women in Albania is at least have been through one of the types of the sexual violence, including here harassment, sexual harassment, and other types of sexual violence. With this, I wanted to emphasize the fact that we need to work more. When I say we, is we as civil society as well, especially towards education, including children and students in high schools and universities, in order to inform them more and better on the sexual violence, on where they need to report, etc. We have in the report here that in Albania has been established the first emergency center against crisis center against sexual violence. So this is a good practice as well. And but it needs to work on its in increasing its capacities, including here financial and human resources capacities. And this could be done very well with some women's organizations that have been providing this type of services for more than 20 years now. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ines. And these are really horrid numbers when it comes to sexual violence, but it's good to hear also about some of the things that are being done, and some additional ideas also to address this. Thank you. And now I want to go to Kosovo, because I know that, Adelina, this is a topic, gender-based violence, that you're working with very closely, and as well as many of your members. So I think we're very interested to hear how your work is going right now, and how it has been affected by the COVID. So please.
Thank you, Stina. Yes, I forgot to mention I am the manager at Kosovo Women's Network on the program against violence against women. gender-based violence, because we want to see violence more broadly, not just against women and girls, but also against LGBTQI women and the men also. So we treat it as a gender-based violence initially. Situation in Kosovo, as Georgia said, was quite similar with the region. We had a more than 30% increase of reported cases in the institutions during the lockdown. Especially during the isolation period when women were forced to stay at home with their abusive partners or other family members. And this has, of course, saddened us. It's not a reality that we are not aware of, because we are in touch with women and we do research and we know how widespread violence is in Kosovo. But to know that during the epidemic, when everyone was double stressed, having also this problem, it was very, very sad for us as activists. There were a lot of efforts that we tried to do to see ways to support, women, and we did our best to find emergency funds for women who were tackled by violence. We were in touch with shelters and with Ministry of Justice. We managed to create a cooperation with small retails in order to seek for opportunities to employ these women during the pandemics. We also were trying with the government to open a shelter which was only for the pandemic. It was in an unknown place for the rest of the society, but we were afraid. Shelters rose this concern that women who suffer from violence but are also affected by pandemic, it would be very difficult if they go in the shelters, because shelters didn't have all the means to protect themselves from cases from virus. So a shelter was open for these women specifically. It was by state and run by state, supported by shelters who are women, who are NGOs. In Kosovo, all shelters are civil society organizations, but they get a license from the Ministry of Social Welfare. When it comes to financial support, right now shelters are in a bit of a crisis, because usually this is what happens. This has become a yearly problem, because usually the budget, Kosovo budget gets voted on March, and usually January for shelters becomes a very critical timing, because there is no budget plan for them or sent to them, implemented to them. So we are, for the moment, we are advocating for this. We are trying to make the government either find an emergency fund for shelters for these 2 months, or to kind of make pressure in the parliament to vote for the law on budget for 2021. Because of our advocacy, luckily this next year we will have an increase in amount in the budget line for shelters. It will be 1 million euros next year. This is what the government is promising. We hope that it will get voted. But these are the concerns that we face yearly. Also, with pandemics, we tried a lot to raise work of shelters in online counseling. So for women who are in isolation and it's impossible for them to seek support, we try to increase these capacities of shelters. We put them in touch with our members from the region to train them, kind of, but also we try to stay in touch with different donors to ensure that all shelters will get equipment to ensure telecounseling. So they got some computers, telephones, and other means of communication in order to ensure that at least online platforms will be available for women to reach for help. In other aspects, we were, as I mentioned, on 25th of September this year, our assembly voted for the Istanbul Convention. In the mid of pandemics, when everything was going wrong, this was a positive news for us as activists, because it's been a long time that we've been advocating for this. And now we are happy that we have the Istanbul Convention part of our constitution, but now a lot of work awaits us as a society in order to see how we will implement it. So I will not go any further with terms of COVID and gender-based violence, but gender-based violence remains one of the main concerns that women here struggle, and I guess throughout the world. And we will not stop. We are actually right now implementing different activities. We are providing legal support for women who are survivors of different types of violence. We try to represent them in courts, in other institutions, to inform them about their rights. It's not an easy thing, but we can do a lot because this is a state responsibility to protect their citizens. But unfortunately, states are failing to support us women. And that's why we have us activists and the women activists to be the voice of those who are less fortunate and to represent them in all whenever it's needed for them. And I'm sorry for the noise, but working from home, pandemic brought these conditions. I have a baby around, so I assume the audience will understand the working conditions. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Adelina. No, it's illustrative for sure, the working conditions that we are under, and the majority of women possibly are under. Thank you so much for this very comprehensive overview and specifically about the information on shelters, and it's so important with this continued funding. I mean, everyone who works with gender-based violence know that it demands a lot of resources to support women to leave violence, and these funding gaps are really, really unacceptable. Like, makes it very, very difficult. So it's also good to hear that there is more funding underway, and let's hope that there won't be a funding gap this year as has been previously. Thank you so much. And we have a comment also asking, someone wanted to see a panelist from Montenegro, and I'm very happy about that comment. We would like to see that as well. Unfortunately, partners in Montenegro it's a lot of things going on right now. So of course they were invited, but had other things. And for those listeners who joined underways, we were also supposed to have a colleague from Bosnia and Herzegovina, from Tuzla, but unfortunately Tuzla is out of electricity. So that's why we don't have anyone from Bosnia either. So speaking about shelters, I want to let you in, Sofia, because the report looks specifically at shelters and also obstacles for Roma women to access shelters. So I think it would be important just to touch upon this topic as well, please.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Stina. And yes, I agree. This is an important a part of the work when we're talking about GBV, women in politics, any parts of the report, really. So it's good to take the space and opportunity to address some of these issues as well. And just in work and in writing the report and in research and just in day-to-day existence as a woman human rights defender, it's really hard to say which aspect influences more of the others. So when it comes to gender-based violence and shelters and Roma women's access to shelter, or Ashkali women's access to shelters, or Egyptian women's access to shelters in the Western Balkans, there's really so many structural things that are providing barriers and challenges to accessing shelters. And a lot of them are very common and shared throughout the Western Balkans. And then a lot are also very particular to not only the country, but even just community-specific challenges and barriers. There is one section of the report this year under gender-based violence where there is an analysis of the Western Balkans and Roma women's access to shelters, as well as a section that's about access to shelter for women with different abilities. And not just shelters, but shelters and services as prescribed by the Istanbul Convention. And I think these things are really important to look at. And when researching for the section on Roma women's access to shelters, one of the main barriers we as researchers saw was that there's actually very little data, and for a number of reasons, but there's very little data when it comes to social work centers who, whether or not it's true, they say that they don't want to, in a lot of the countries, they don't want to ask people what their nationality is. They believe it's not important and that it shouldn't determine anything. But on the other hand, it is very important. We do need to know some of these things. And if people are self-identifying in certain ways, they should be able to say this so that we know what to do in the future and how to better address these things. So when we go back to just the idea of structural challenges and barriers in accessing shelters, there's so many of those that when Roma women do have the opportunity to access a shelter, it is so discouraging and heartbreaking when they get one person or one social worker who has, on top of everything they went through, their own personal prejudice or discrimination, and then share things with partner organizations such as, well, she keeps coming here and she keeps going back to her husband. Why would I help her? And things like this, and encouraging the state to take the children away from the mother because she keeps going back to the father, and these things. So these are things that we, in our lack of access to data, we spoke to partner organizations who work closely with Roma women, and these are some of the things we got as feedback from what they heard in social work centers, in women's shelters, and things like that. And so just the sheer, I want to explain just how the sheer wall that's there, and just getting past that wall, and then finally being there and addressing all those challenges, and then that one final setback. And then of course women are discouraged. And when it comes to services as well, I mean, it's very much the same thing. And I mean, to some extent, people watching might be like, yes, we already knew this, these structural barriers exist, but I think it's really important to write them into a report. And I think it's important to have this discussion and to talk about them. And so they are real and they're being addressed. And this is all the more reason why it's really too bad that Tuzla lost electricity now, because Bolja Budućnost in Tuzla is such an expert in this field, and it would be fantastic to have their point of view as well. But it's just, I always go back to this idea of these structural things that are in place and that make very real these stories that we hear that might be anecdotal, but are still a form of real life stories. And when we talk about data and research and things like that, there are people behind these numbers. They're real people. I mean, I think it's something that Adelina said, the real problems women face. And I thought that was a really powerful statement when it comes to this discussion, because these are real women, and we can talk about percentages and things like that, but there's real people being impacted by this. So on one side, it's great that data exists and we need more of it, but on the other, we need to keep this in mind as well, that these are real numbers that we're talking about. So I think that's enough for now, and I can pass it on to colleagues.
Thank you so much, Sofia. This is a very important perspective, and I think those examples are so telling and really gives us another dimension, as you say, and than the horrid numbers. But now I want to let you in, Irena, because you're representing Coalition Margins, and you work specifically with different groups of marginalized people. So we would love to hear your perspective on gender-based violence and how it has been affecting the people that you're working with during this pandemic, please.
Thank you, Stina. And I would just like to emphasize that the COVID-19 crisis just straightened and made more visible all the systematic gaps and problems that already existed within our society. And of course, you can even imagine the impact of such crisis. It's much harsher when it comes to the most vulnerable and most marginalized members of our society. But first, what I noticed is that the rhetorics concerning the pandemic really reminded me of a military rhetorics. The usage of the words such as attack, enemy, combat against, it's more masculine military narrative than narrative that a health crisis requires, I would say. So the whole picture was framed as we are under attack by an invisible enemy, and not as we as humans are vulnerable, our bodies are vulnerable. And what is most important, the level of vulnerability depends in many cases of the class and social groups that we belong to. So, that's why we see army in front of the hospitals defending not us, but the system structures. And that's why we see the universal approach to the pandemic instead of comprehensive approach that takes into consideration aspects of specific influence that this pandemic has on marginalized communities. And as feminists, we all know that whenever there is universal approach, it's not good. We have a problem. So anti-COVID measures were created without inclusion of women and marginalized communities or taken into consideration their specific needs. So the lockdowns and curfews were applied generally at the beginning, and women that were suffering violence were punishing for breaking the rule of staying home. I would just share the very recent event where in the case of domestic violence, the police came, after the police was called, they came in front of the house where the act of violence was still going on, and they didn't enter to help the women that was beaten in that time, in that moment, because they found out that the man, I think, is COVID-19 positive, and they didn't have masks. So they were just standing on the door watching the act of violence. Of course, the global stay-home recommendations and obligations might trigger some positive aspects among many people. But for some people, especially for many members of the LGBTI community, home is not a safe place. And domestic violence among LGBTI people was again underreported and ignored by the institutions. Nearly 60% of the community claim mental health problems because of the crisis caused by COVID-19, and most of them claim that it's because of this staying home, which sometimes means staying in the closet. So the state missed the opportunity to address the needs of these communities, mostly because our inputs were not invited in the first phase. Now we have different situation, and I think that there is still a hope. And then when it comes to Roma, it is very important to understand that also, again, the universal application of the measures is it's not good for every community. So, for example, hygiene measures were applied everywhere in the same way, even among Roma community living in areas without access to clean water. We had one case of recorded by a mobile phone, case of police brutality towards Roma people that were not wearing masks. And of course, many Roma women are engaged in gray or informal economies, such as housekeeping, cleaning in households. So when the pandemic started, they lost their jobs and income, and this specific need was not recognized by the measure. But finally, just to share that this pandemic included shadow pandemic that affected the mental health of the already fragile citizens. So fear, anxiety, affective disorders, stress, and insomnia are part of these psychological consequences. And in North Macedonia, we see increased the number of patients within the state psychiatric clinics for 30% compared to last year, and cases of domestic violence increase of 25%. And yet we don't see coordinated action to prevent this or apply some strategies for harm reduction.
Mm-hmm. Thank you so much, Irena. So many important points. I mean, as you say, the COVID is really showing existing structures. And I think the examples you provided really illustrated that in, very illustratively. So, my friends, we have about 7 minutes left. We need to wrap up. And some of you already mentioned the issue of security for women human rights defenders and the issue of the civic space that we're all in. And I want to give the floor to everyone once again to be very brief. And if you have like a final message, if we can look a bit towards the future, what you see, what you would like to see, And if you want to mention the Security for Women Human Rights Defenders, please do, or if you have some other message that you think would be most important for our listeners to share. So I'm going to invite Ines first. So just like 1 minute per for everyone, just to give some final comments, please.
Yes, very shortly. Maybe I will remain, or I will stick to the collaboration, the importance of collaboration between civil society, communities, especially communities, and the engagement of the communities, and of course local governments and central government. But it's important to empower target groups with whom we are working. So in this case, girls and women, not only those in need, to empower girls and women that are willing to be part of the political life, for example, but might have not the right capacities, or might need some capacity building or some encouragement, even from their own political parties. Working more to extend the collaboration at local level between local governments, institutions, especially in our case, for example, working to build a sustainable referral mechanisms that are working against domestic violence at local level in Albania, in order for the issues and problems to be tackled not from the ministries, in our case, Ministry of Health and Social Protection, but possibly be solved within communities and local representation of institutions, and as well, of course, in those areas where civil society, women's organizations are working. Another very important issue is, again, awareness raising and education. I will repeat this. I said this even before, of young people on not only domestic violence, but gender equality as a concept, feminism, and as well being involved in feminist issues. This is something that is let's say, lacking as information, as knowledge, and as culture here in Albania. And I would like as well to mention that the women's movement is existing, is a very good one, but still we need to work on being more and more organizations together, not only the organizations that are working for women's issues, but those that are as well working for human rights issues, why not environment, so mainstreaming gender, let's say. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Ines. Very important messages. Thank you. And Georgia, please.
Well, I wanted to end on a happy note, in a sense that even though I hate the word possibilities or opportunities in a pandemic, I do think that there is something to be said about the sustainability of the feminist movement. Globally, what we are seeing is shifting of power, and structures that have been frozen in time and space are becoming looser and looser. And they're becoming looser and looser thanks to grassroots organizing. And I think this is what makes women's and feminist movements very unique and future-oriented. And I think that that is the message that I think it's important for us here. We live in areas that do not have a huge history of movements. We have rebellions, but not movements. And I think that feminist movement can learn a lot from this history, but is also giving enormously to these contexts. And I think that I'm hopeful for that, no matter how difficult it is, and even though that we are honestly in a survival mode right now. But I'm hopeful for next 2-3 years. Thank you, and thank you for this opportunity.
Thank you so much, Georgia. Very important. Thank you, Adelina.
Thank you, Stina. Well, we discussed a lot here, and we see how we all have the same problems, and this is what the connects us all, be it women in politics, women activists, or women who are at home, or women who don't have any opportunity at all. We are in this together, and we should be the voices of each other and support each other and show sisterhood everywhere we can. And we see also these initiatives, how we cooperate within region, within something that our politicians aren't any good example. We are giving them this example, see how women work together in order to improve the lives of each other, and forget about anything that we can consider as that divides us. Nothing divides us. We are humans, we are in this together, and we should stick together to improve our lives and be the voices of those who are less fortunate, and always represent the needs of women. I invite also men and boys to join our fight and become examples of human rights promoters. And I hope that the future will become better. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Adelina. And Irena, please.
Well, I think for the conclusion, I will say I'm really happy for the Balkan women human rights defenders and how we are nurturing this politics of solidarity. And I know that Western Balkans is a challenging context, and we have a lot to do in the future. But against all odds, Western Balkans has very vibrant feminist scene and movement, and as you can see, as I can see here in the panel, a lot of strong and smart women. It is for me always inspiring. So I would say I'm really proud of all of you, and I hope we're going to continue our fight. And just to say, this is why I love the Balkans.
Thank you so much, Irena. That's a perfect ending, I think. So in summary, collaborate, don't underestimate your power. We're in this together, solidarity, and let's continue the fight. Thank you so much, Ines, Georgia, Adelina, Irena, Sofia, for all your contributions and taking your time in this hectic period. I would like to thank everyone who was listening, and thank you for your comments as well. And I would like to encourage everyone to find the report on Kvinna till Kvinna's website. And with this, stay safe, everyone, and have a nice evening. Goodbye.
Bye.